The Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog Bulger. Chapter 5, Part 7. The force of the explosion of the first of these tiny puffballs of humanity had been sufficient to burst the baby next in line, and so on to the end of the chain. A dozen of them gone in as many seconds, and not so much as a lock of hair to carry home to the heartbroken mothers. In a few moments, the news of the accident had spread to every quarter of the village. The weeping, shrieking mothers, howling for vengeance, gathered quickly about the dwelling into the interior of which Bulger and I had retreated. Now, you may believe me when I say that I would not have stood in the least dread of an army of the Wind Eaters when they were fully inflated after a hearty meal. But it so happened that the air had been calm for a few days or so, and that many of them were now shrunken to the living skeleton size in which I had first met them. In this condition, they were foes not to be despised, for moving as they did with almost lightning rapidity, their mode of fighting was to entangle their enemy in fine nets woven of bamboo fiber and then beat them to death with their clubs. True, these clubs were made of corkwood, and a score of them weighed less than a pound. Yet this fact would only make death slower and more painful, for while a few blows might suffice to put one of their own kind out of his misery, it would most surely have required a whole day for them to beat the life out of such a solid enemy as I was. Before I had a chance to collect my thoughts, Go Wiz was at the door with his band, their nets coiled to throw over me, while behind the net throwers stood a row of club bearers, anxiously awaiting their turn to begin proceedings. I thought to myself, this is serious business. If Chief Zwishwish is not at hand, they will entangle me in their nets and try to beat the life out of me before he returns, for they well know his affection for me. But worse than all was the fact that Go Wiz had just returned from a distant part of the island, whither he and a few of his chums had made a secret journey in order to gorge themselves on the rude and boisterous northwest wind. He was full of swagger and ire. I had never seen him swollen to such a size. His voice sounded like the deep bellowing of some fierce animal. He whirled his net in the air and called out in thundering tones for his men to follow him. I felt now that the moment had arrived for me to make a desperate effort to save my life and Bulger's too, for with his 4 feet twisted up in one of these nets, he would fall an easy prey to Go Wiz and his band. I felt, too, that it would be worse than useless to appeal to Go Wiz for mercy, influenced as he was by long and deep draughts of the fierce and raging northwest gale. There he stood, puffing, blowing, blustering, swaggering, as round and round his head he swung the fatal web, which, the moment I should attempt to take my back from the wall, he intended to cast over me as a fowler would entrap a bird. Suddenly, I bethought myself of the little instrument which had brought me to this dangerous strait. Before drawing it, however, from its hiding place, I determined to play the bully and swagger a little myself. Now, the heaviest wind eater weighs about 6 pounds, and as you may imagine, my weight, nearly 100 pounds, was a source of great dread to them. They stood in constant fear that I might accidentally tread upon one of the toes of a wind eater and explode him, before they would allow me to venture out upon one of their balconies or to inhabit an upper story of one of their dwellings. They proceeded to strengthen it with the stoutest bamboo poles they could find. So I now began to give the valiant Go Wiz a few gentle reminders of my weight and solidity. Leaping high into the air, I landed upon the bamboo flooring with such a thump that everything creaked and trembled. At first, there was a general stampede of Go Wiz's followers, and that blustering leader was the only one left to face Bulger and me. He stood his ground pretty bravely, although I could see that he was half inclined to heed the cries of his men and make his way out of the dwelling before I succeeded in wrecking it. But after a few more of my jumps, seeing that the flooring withstood all my effort to break it down, Go Wiz succeeded in rallying his band. Again, and now more furious than ever, they surrounded me, shrieking and howling like mad, their uplifted right hands bearing the dangerous nets with which they hoped to entangle Bulger and me and then dispatch us. Now, it was high time for me to fall back on my reserves. I did so. The effect was simply astounding. The needle proved to be one of the kind used for darning, very long and bright and exceedingly sharp pointed. My dagger point was bad enough. It had thrown them into wild and panicky fear. But this little instrument, as I brandished it in front of them, threw them into fits of rigid terror. They stood rooted to the ground, their bulging eyes riveted upon the needlepoint as if they, one and all, expected it to prick them to death if they stirred an inch. At last, making a mighty effort, Go Wiz broke away from the spot, uttering a deep and rumbling cry of horror, his men rolling after him in the wildest terror. When they saw the tumultuous manner in which the valiant Go Wiz and his followers retreated from my presence, the assembled men and women, with frightful cries, took to their heels as if a legion of demons were pursuing them. In a few moments, Bulger and I stood alone on the battlefield. He had not budged from my side during the time that death threatened me. "Come," said I, as I stooped and stroked his head. "Come, thou faithful friend and companion. Let us go to Chief Switch Switch and lay the matter before him." The chief had just awoke from a noonday nap. He had calmly slept through the whole conflict, and so it was necessary for me to give him a full account of the unfortunate accident which resulted in exploding an entire string of babies, and of Go Wiz's attempt to slay me. He listened with great calmness and most patiently, too. He then begged to be excused for a few moments, as an attendant had just informed him that a very soft and sweet south wind had begun to blow. He stepped out on the balcony, and after he had taken a dozen mouthfuls of the pure, refreshing breeze, returned, looking a little plumper, and, like all men, after enjoying a meal of favorite food, was still more amiable and kindly in his manner than before. The news that a dozen of the smallest subjects had been so unceremoniously popped out of existence didn't seem to worry him very much. What moved him most of all was the fact which, apparently up to that hour, had never entered into his mind, namely, that a point so fine, so delicate, so deadly, so nearly invisible, could be created by the hand of man. I assured him that it was that very moment, hidden in the stuff of my garb, right in front of his eyes. He trembled. I strove to reassure him by explaining to him that I would as soon think of plunging my poniard into my own heart as of turning this almost invisible and yet deadly point against his life. He tried to smile, but it ended in a shudder. "Thinkest thou, little man thick all through," asked Chief Switch Switch with a trembling tongue, "that I may look upon it and not fall into a swoon?" "Oh, most assuredly, great chief," was my reply. "In fact, most light and buoyant Switch Switch," I continued, "I can rob this dreaded instrument of all its power to injure thee and place it in thy hand like any harmless bit of wood. Is it thy will that I should thus deliver to thee this dreaded point?" With a slight shiver, Chief Switch Switch made answer. "Aye, great and learned little master, I think I can bear the sight of it now. I am indeed very brave, but thou knowest a single prick of that deadly point would instantly end the life of the sturdiest wind-eater." I again assured him that there was really nothing to dread so long as he followed my directions. So saying, I drew the darning needle from its hiding place. Chief Switch Switch closed his eyes at first, but gradually grew bold enough to gaze upon the glittering point. Stooping down, I picked up one of the cork clubs and, breaking off a bit of the smaller end, thrust the needle point into it. Chief Switch Switch watched my movements with a sort of painful curiosity. "There, great chief of the wind-eaters," I exclaimed. "Now thou mayest toy with it. Hide it in the rushes of thy bed. It cannot injure thee. It is as harmless as a pebble rounded by the sportive, sparkling waters of one of thy mountain brooks. Take it. It may serve thee some day in case of a sudden attack upon thy illustrious person. At such a moment, fear not, seize it firmly, draw its dreaded point from its hiding place in this bit of cork. So small it is that it will be invisible in thy hand, and while thine enemy stands before thee in fancied safety, pierce him to death. For thou art ruler, and it is fitting that death should strike him who attempts to rob thy people of their chief. Chief Switch Switch took the needle with trembling hands and hid the bit of cork which held it under the thatch of the roof. Then, calling out, he summoned one of his serving men and bade him bring from a neighboring apartment a certain small bamboo chest from which he drew a string of rare jewels, somewhat of the nature of amber, only 1,000 times more brilliant. With this beautiful gift, he dismissed me, issuing orders to his ministers that no harm should be allowed to come to me for the accident which exploded the string of little wind eaters. Go Wiz could with difficulty hide his anger at seeing me once more an honored guest at the court of the Chief Switch Switch. I did not relax my vigilance in the least, however. Every night I barred the windows with my own hands and placed Bulger's mat of rushes in front of the door, so that it would be impossible for the wrathful leader to surprise me. Now that the explosion of the babies was quite forgotten, my sojourn among the wind eaters would have continued to be extremely pleasant had not a new difficulty arisen to cause me anxiety. The rather thin diet upon which I had been existing since my arrival among these curious people, while it appeased my hunger, robbed me of that plump and well-fed look which I had always had. I found myself losing flesh at an alarming rate. Chief Switch Switch and Queen Fuyu were delighted, for as they expressed it, the little man thick all through was rapidly becoming, in appearance at least, a genuine wind eater. Bulger, too, fell away dreadfully. Now and then I surprised him with his dark, lustrous eyes fixed upon me with as much as to say, "Oh, little master, what is the matter with us? We eat, and yet we grow thin. Are we really turning to wind eaters?" And another bad phase of the matter was that while my ever-increasing leanness was causing me so much anxiety, it was carrying joy to the heart of Queen Fuyu, who, it seems, had formed the plan of keeping me for the rest of my life in the service of her lord and master by bestowing upon me the hand of the fair princess Hufa. And we're going to pause here and we'll continue with this story in the next video. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Thanks so much for watching. I love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.